If you're new here, welcome to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep sharing stories that deserve to be heard. After my dad's funeral, my brother-in-law took over of my dad's company and $550 million, arrogantly stating, "From today onward, this company is mine and all you get is your dad's old truck." However, when I started the truck's engine, the navigation system suddenly activated, guiding me to a location preset by my dad. I was surprised when I arrived because a big surprise was waiting for me. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Also, can you believe it is already 2026? Happy New Year to this amazing family. I hope this year brings you strength and new beginnings. If you want to support the channel and see more stories like this, please show some love in the comments. It really helps us grow. Now back to the story. It was raining. Of course, it was Leo stood there under his oversized black umbrella, looking like he had just won the lottery. Instead of burying a father-in-law, he tossed the keys at me. They were jagged, rusty, and smelled like insult. "Stick to your flowers, Theo," he sneered, smoothing his expensive suit. "Leave the business to the men." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just gripped the cold metal until it bit into my palm, turned my back on the empire I helped build, and climbed into the driver's seat. The van smelled like peppermint gum and stale tobacco. My father, it was a sensory ambush hitting me the moment I pulled the door shut, sealing myself inside a metal box that felt more like a tomb than a vehicle for a second. Just a single heartbeat. My throat tightened. I wanted to lean my forehead against the steering wheel and let the grief wash over me, but then I looked in the rear view mirror. Leo was still standing on the porch of the mansion that was now his, watching me leave. He was smiling. That smile evaporated my tears instantly. Grief was a luxury I could not afford. Rage was fuel and I had a full tank. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughing like a dying man before roaring to life with a defiant rattle. I shifted the heavy gear stick and drove, leaving the gravel driveway of the estate behind without looking back. "Stick to your flowers," he had said, as if nurturing something was a weakness, as if building something from the dirt up wasn't the hardest work in the world for the last 3 years. While cancer ate my father from the inside out, I was the one changing 4 bags. I was the one managing the morphine drips and holding his hand when the pain made him forget his own name. Where was Leo? He was on the golf course. He was networking. He was managing the company into stagnation, while waiting for the old man to die. Leo thought my father was too sick to notice the neglect. He thought the morphine had blinded him. But my father saw everything. He saw who was holding the bucket and he saw who was holding the checkbook. As the iron gates of the estate faded into the distance, my thoughts shifted to Samantha, my sister. She had stood right next to Leo as he humiliated me. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't even looked at me. A few years ago, that silence would have broken my heart. I would have called her cruel. But as I drove down the winding coastal road, I realized something colder, something clinical. Samantha wasn't mean, she was broken. Leo hadn't just taken over the company, he had colonized her mind over a decade. He had redefined abuse as executive stress. He had rebranded his narcissism as business genius. He had slowly, methodically normalized his cruelty, until she couldn't tell the difference between a husband and a hostage taker. She didn't defend me because in her world, defending the victim is a betrayal of the master. She was trapped in a psychological prison with invisible bars, and she was too terrified to even rattle the cage. I wasn't just leaving her behind. I was leaving her in the belly of the beast. I was halfway to the highway when the dashboard flickered. The radio crackled with static cutting through the silence and the digital clock flashed 13. Then the screen in the center console lit up. It wasn't the factory system. It was a modern GPS unit retrofitted clumsily into the plastic. It bleeped once, loud and sharp. A single destination appeared on the glowing map. No address, no street name, just 3 words pulsating in green text point. My father's voice echoed in my memory, clear as a bell drive. Carefully. Mo, you know the way I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I didn't turn toward my apartment. I tightened my grip on the wheel and turned toward the coast. The game hadn't ended at the funeral, it had just begun. The GPS led me off the pavement and onto a gravel track that wound like a scar along the cliff edge. The ocean churned below, gray and violent, matching the storm brewing in my chest. 0 Point wasn't a bank, it wasn't a lawyer's office. It was the old light, a decommissioned lighthouse warehouse where my father had parked his very first truck 46 years ago. It sat on a desolate stretch of headland. The paint peeling the Titan Logistics logo faded to a ghost on the corrugated metal to the world. It was a ruin to Leo. It was probably just another asset to liquidate. But as I pulled the van up to the rusted bay doors, I realized it was the only place Leo never visited. It was too dirty, too real. I killed the engine. The silence was heavy, broken only by the wind whistling through the cracks in the siding. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box and stepped out. The key Leo had thrown at me didn't just fit the ignition. There was a second, smaller key on the ring. It slid into the padlock on the warehouse door with a satisfying click. I pushed the heavy steel door open, bracing myself for the smell of abandonment. Instead, I smelled Earl Grey tea. My mother was sitting at a folding table in the center of the vast empty space. A single industrial work lamp was on, casting long shadows against the walls. Susan, who had spent the entire funeral trembling like a leaf, clutching a handkerchief and leaning on Leo for support, was now sitting with her back straight, reading a file. She looked up as I entered. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were steady. Close the door. Theo, she said, her voice didn't waver. It was the voice of the woman who had balanced the books. When this company was nothing but 3 trucks and a dream, I stood frozen. Mom, what are you doing here? I asked. Leo thinks you're at the estate. Sedated, she closed the file and gestured to the heavy fireproof safe, sitting on the floor beside her. Leo thinks what we want him to think. She replied calmly. He thinks I am a grieving widow who will sign whatever paper he puts in front of me. He thinks you are a defeated gardener who will drive this van into the ocean. He is wrong on both counts. I walked closer, looking at the safe. Why, I whispered. Why did Dad let this happen? Why did he let Leo take the company? Why did he leave me nothing but this van? My mother stood up and walked over to me. She placed a hand on my cheek, her touch firm. He didn't leave you nothing. Theo, he left you the weapon. She explained it, then the truth that rearranged my entire understanding of the last 3 years. My father hadn't been blind to Leo's greed. He had been watching him. He was the silent watchman. He knew that if he fired Leo while he was alive, Leo would have burned the company to the ground out of spite. He would have leveraged the debt, destroyed the reputation, and taken Samantha down with him. Leo had made himself the load-bearing wall of the company. Removing him forcefully would have collapsed the roof on all of us. So, Dad played the long game. He had to die to make Leo feel safe. He had to let Leo believe he had won, that the old man was too sick to notice the embezzlement, too weak to fight back. He knew Leo's arrogance was his only blind spot. Leo would never fear me because he didn't respect me. He would never check the van because he saw it his trash. Dad built a Trojan horse out of rust and silence, and he waited until he was in the ground to give the order to attack. My mother spun the dial on the safe. Clicked open. It wasn't an insult. Theo, she said, pulling the heavy door back. It was a handoff. I spent the rest of the night reading. The safe contained 3 things: a leather-bound notebook filled with my father's handwriting, and a hard drive labeled Shadow Books. I started with the notebook. It wasn't a diary. It was a log of crimes. For 5 years, my father had been tracking Leo's every move. Every unexplained withdrawal, every falsified invoice, every shell company set up in the Cayman Islands. Leo wasn't just lazy. He was a parasite. He had been draining the company dry to fund a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control. He had lost millions in high-stakes poker games in Macau and Monaco, covering his losses by embezzling from the employee pension fund and taking out high-interest loans against the company's assets. But the real horror wasn't the theft. It was the forgery. I found a folder of loan applications, all signed by Samantha. My sister's signature was perfect, too perfect. It was a digital copy pasted onto document after document. Leo had set her up. If the company went down, if the creditors came calling, they wouldn't just bankrupt us. They would send Samantha to prison for fraud. She didn't even know she was committing. My justification shifted in an instant. This wasn't about my pride anymore. It wasn't about the insult at the funeral or the rusted van. This was a rescue mission. Leo had turned my sister into his human shield. I looked up from the papers. The sun was rising over the ocean, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. My mother was asleep in a chair wrapped in a blanket. She looked peaceful for the first time in years. Unburdened by the secret she had kept to protect us, I walked to the window outside. The rusted van sat in the tall grass, catching the first light. It looked sturdy, unpretentious, dangerous. Leo saw a gardener. When he looked at me, he saw someone who played with dirt, someone small and inconsequential. He didn't realize that gardeners know exactly how to prune a disease before it kills the whole tree. He didn't know that we aren't afraid to get our hands dirty. I closed the notebook. The fear that had lived in my chest since the funeral evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Leo had built his empire on lies and leverage. He thought he was untouchable because he held the keys to the castle, but he didn't know. I held the blueprints to the foundation and I knew exactly where to plant the dynamite. I didn't storm the castle. Not yet. I went back to work. I put on my muddy boots and my canvas jacket, and I spent my days designing Zen gardens and pruning roses for the wealthy clients Leo despised to the world. I was the defeated sister, the one who had accepted her lot in life. To Leo, the first was invisible. That was my greatest advantage. While Leo was busy buying a 70-foot yacht he couldn't afford and firing the logistics managers who dared to question his vision, I was busy meeting them. I used the operational cash from the safe my father's war chest to hire the best forensic accountant in the state. Then I started making calls. I met the old guard, the board members Leo had ousted or alienated in places. Leo would never set foot in Greasy Spoons on the highway, public parks, the back of my nursery. I drove the rusted van to every meeting. It became a symbol. When I pulled up, they didn't see a failure. They saw Robert's daughter driving Robert's truck. They saw continuity. They saw respect. I showed them the shadow books. Not all of it, just enough to scare them, just enough to prove that their dividends were being funneled into a black hole in Monaco. One by one, their skepticism turned to rage. One by one, they signed their proxy votes over to me. Meanwhile, Leo was unraveling the accounts he tried to drain, were suddenly freezing up thanks to the quiet injunctions my lawyer was filing. He was bleeding cash and losing control, and he didn't know why. He called me late one night, his voice slurring with expensive scotch. "I need you to sign some papers, Theo." He demanded, skipping the pleasantries. "Just some restructuring forms for the estate. I need to liquidate a few legacy assets to streamline operations. I don't understand these legal things," Leo the First said, playing the part perfectly. "You know, I'm not good with business. Maybe we should wait until the quarterly board meeting. I can bring them, then." "Don't be stupid," he snapped. "Just sign them and I'll give you $5,000. Buy yourself some new shovels. I'll see you at the meeting," Leo the First said and hung up. I looked at the calendar on my wall. The quarterly meeting was in 3 days. I had the votes. I had the evidence. I had the element of surprise. Leo thought he was walking into a coronation. He didn't know he was walking into an execution. The quarterly board meeting was held in the glass-walled conference room on the top floor of the Titan Logistics Tower. Leo sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking worse for wear. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie was loose, and he radiated the desperate, aggressive energy of a cornered animal. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man trying to outrun a tsunami. "Let's get this over with," he barked, not even looking at the agenda. "I'm moving to dissolve the current board structure and consolidate executive power. We need agility, not committees." The room was silent. The remaining board members, the few sycophants he hadn't fired yet, looked nervous. They knew the company was bleeding, but they were too afraid to speak. The heavy double doors swung open. I walked in. I wasn't wearing my canvas jacket. I was wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than Leo's yacht deposit. Behind me walked 3 men. Arthur Steyerling, the forensic accountant, and Detective Wilfred from the fraud squad. Leo looked up, confused. Then he laughed. A brittle, nervous sound. "What is this? Bring your daughter to work? Day, go back to your flowers. Theo, the adults are talking." I didn't say a word. I walked to the front of the room, plugged my laptop into the presentation system, and projected a single image onto the massive screen behind Leo. It wasn't a graph. It was a scan of a loan application for $5 million signed by Samantha. Next to it, I projected the digital metadata proving the signature had been copy-pasted from a birthday card. I'm not here to talk about flowers, Leo, I said, my voice calm and carrying to every corner of the room. I'm here to talk about the $46 million you embezzled. Leo's face went white. Then red. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over. You're lying. This is proprietary data. Security, sit down. I said it wasn't a request, it was an order. I own the debt. Leo the First bought the outstanding loans this morning. I control 55% of the voting shares and I have the shadow books. I clicked the remote. The screen filled with rows of numbers, his secret withdrawals, his gambling losses, the shell companies. The room gasped. Leo looked at the screen, then at me, then at the door, and then he broke. It wasn't anger. It was a collapse. The narcissistic injury, the moment, the false self, the genius CEO, the big man shattered into a million pieces. He didn't attack me. He started crying, not tears of remorse but tears of self-pity. It wasn't my fault. He screamed, his voice cracking. The market turned. I was trying to save us. It was your father. He set me up. He knew he wanted me to fail. Then he turned on Samantha, who had just walked in the door. And you never supported me. You just wanted the money. I did this for you. He was unraveling, blaming everyone but himself, shrinking before our eyes until he was just a small, pathetic man in an expensive suit. He looked at me begging. Theo, please, we're family, don't do this. I looked at him cold as the ocean. We aren't family. Leo, you're just a bad investment. I nodded to Detective Wilfred. He's all yours. Leo was escorted out in handcuffs, screaming about lawyers and conspiracies, until the elevator doors finally slid shut, cutting off his voice. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the projector. Samantha stood by the door, staring at the screen, where her forged signature glowed in high definition. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. The spell was broken, the years of gaslighting, of being told she was crazy, of being made to feel small so Leo could feel big. It all shattered under the weight of undeniable proof. She didn't scream, she wept. It was a quiet, devastating sound, the sound of someone mourning the years they had lost. I walked over and put my arms around her. I'm sorry. She whispered into my shoulder. I'm so sorry. Emo, it's okay. I said, holding her tight. He's gone. We're safe. In the weeks that followed, the company went through a painful but necessary detox. I took the CEO chair temporarily, just long enough to stabilize the ship. I hired Arthur Sterling as the CFO and brought back one of the ousted board members, a woman named Elena, who had been my father's right hand, to serve as interim president. I realized quickly that I didn't want the corner office. I didn't want to live in a glass tower. My place was designing the culture, ensuring that the roots of the company were healthy, not pruning the leaves. Samantha filed for divorce and started therapy. It wasn't easy. The financial fallout was messy and the emotional scars were deep. But for the first time in a decade, I saw my sister smile, a real smile, not the practiced grimace she wore for Leo's benefit. 6 months later, I walked out to the parking lot of the nursery where I still worked part-time. The van was there, I hadn't sold it. Instead, I had taken it to a specialist. The rust was gone. The engine rebuilt. The body painted a deep, lustrous forest green. It looked classic, sturdy and proud. It was no longer a symbol of neglect. It was a symbol of resilience. I climbed into the driver's seat. It still smelled like peppermint gum, but the stale tobacco scent was gone, replaced by fresh leather and sage. I opened the glove box and pulled out an old cassette tape I had found under the seat. During the restoration, it was labeled Road Trip Mix 99. I pushed it into the deck. There was a moment of static, and then my father's voice filled the cab, recording over the beginning of a song. Drive carefully, Mo. You know the way. I smiled, put the van in gear and drove toward the coast. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and violet. I wasn't just a gardener anymore. I was the keeper of the legacy, and the harvest was finally in. Sometimes you have to play the long game to protect the people you love. Sometimes you have to let the weeds grow tall, just so you can pull them out by the roots. If you believe truth always wins, my story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thanks for listening and see you in the next videos.